Hello, I'm Mari Ashby and my guest this week, Mark Spencer, is the Conservative MP for Sherwood and Margot Parker is a UKIP member for the European Parliament for the East Midlands. Welcome to you both. And let's start by looking at a story raised in the Commons this week. A Derbyshire head teacher who normally runs marathons for charity is having to raise funds for his school instead. Dave Shaw is head of Spire Primary School in Chesterfield, which is facing a £19,000 cut in its budget. His case was raised by Toby Perkins at this week's Prime Minister's Questions.
The head teacher, Dave Shaw, was running the Great North Run for a cancer charity. However, her new school's funding formula means that the Spire Junior School now face the biggest cuts in all of Derbyshire. Running for cash is now the only alternative to sacking staff.
Mark Spencer, Dave Shaw there used to run for charity. Running marathons for charity is one thing, but having to run to pay his staff's wages, that's mad.
Yeah, so I think clearly every pupil, whether they're in Chesterfield or in Sherwood, should get the same amount of funding right across the country, and that's what we're trying to achieve. At the moment, a pupil in Nottinghamshire gets about £4,300 per year. If you compare that to Islington, to pick a constituency at random, that's over £6,000 per pupil. Now, even if you consider the London weighting of that, that's fundamentally unfair. So, I mean, the good news is that Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire win on average when we apply this new formula.
Funding, yeah.
So I think, we've got to bring balance to the country so that a pupil in Sherwood gets the same cash as a pupil anywhere else in the country.
And that head teachers like Dave don't have to go running to try and get money to pay the wages. This isn't just a one-off though, Mark, is it? I mean, the PTA, the charity which supports parents, reported just over a week ago that more than a third of parents are being asked to contribute to school funds, to top it up, if you like. That's not right, is it?
Well, I mean, I think if you go back, parent-teacher associations have existed forever. I mean, there's always something else you can buy to support your school and other
yes, but this
cash
is for
that could
books
be
and
raised.
things like that. That children need to be educated.
So we need to make sure that the funding system for our schools is fair right across the country, and whether you're a pupil here in Nottinghamshire or Derbyshire or Leicestershire, you get the same support, same amount of cash as everywhere else in the country. And that seems fair to me. At the moment, it's unbalanced.
Margot Parker, what do you think about this? Is this fair?
No, I mean, clearly it's got to be balanced out. It's not right that somebody runs to hand a load of money over in order to be able to maintain a teacher or maintain breakfast at school or whatever it is they're trying to do. There should be an equal playing field. You can't mess around with education. It's got to be fair.
There's a £19,000 budget shortfall at this school.
Yeah, that's massive. It's not acceptable.
It's worth pointing out, at the moment, it's not fair. So there are schools who are getting a lot less cash in Nottinghamshire than in other parts of the country.
Well, how would UKIP fund that, Margot? Sorry, Mark.
Well, to be quite honest, education is very important. So I mean, at the end of the day, it has to be found from somewhere. I mean, I'm not an education spokesperson, but I can tell you that you've got to have a fairness. You've got to have kids that if they don't get a breakfast and a breakfast is provided at school, that's important, because no child should have to start their day hungry or any other way. There should be a balance there. So wherever it comes from, I think it has to be found, because the children are the future. At the end of the day, we've got to do our best for them. It's not their fault. We have to really look after them.
OK. Well, hundreds of women from across the East Midlands are planning to join a national protest in London next month against changes to their pensions. The so-called WASPIs, or Women Against State Pension Inequality, are angry that changes to their retirement age have left them having to work longer than planned or struggling for money. Our political reporter Helen McCulloch has been to Mansfield to meet them.
Send me a forecast, drop me a line, time to change your mind. Indicate precisely what you mean to say. Waspy women, this is our day.
The Waspi campaign began 2 years ago, when women born in the 1950s began to retire, or so they thought. Two pensions acts aimed at bringing women's retirement age in line with men meant women born in the 50s would have to wait until they were 66 to get their state pension. Campaigners say they were never informed of the changes and have had no time to plan.
Very angry, I'm very frustrated, and I've completely lost all trust in the government and politicians and systems and what they tell you.
I paid a full stamp, and I honestly thought I would get my pension when I reached 60, which was last year. I organised this big party, everything thinking, and 2 weeks before this, and then I get told off that I'm not going to get nothing.
Tricia Clough is one of the main coordinators of the campaign and insists the government failed to inform millions of women of the change to their pension.
The government is saying we put it out on the news, we had a news item, and we also put little articles in newspapers. They should have sent us a letter. We've had women who've lost their partners who have had to sell their family home. We've had some women who've had to go on job seekers schemes, which they found really difficult emotionally, physically.
Meetings like this are happening up and down the country, and it seems the Waspi movement shows no signs of slowing down, but not everybody has welcomed their campaign.
If the Waspi campaign got their way, which was for a bridging pension from 60 to 66 for every woman born in the 1950s, then a woman born on the 1st of January 1960 would not only see her classmate one day older get 6 years of pension that she would not get, but she would have to pay for that through higher national insurance contributions and higher taxes. I can't see how that is in any way fair. The other group of people I think are grossly discriminated against by this actually are men.
The Department for Work and Pensions say that the decision to equalise the state pension age was made over 20 years ago, and there are no plans to change this now.
My husband's retired now, and 2 of us are living on his pension. No other income coming in, so we're just having to scrape through. I'm not going away. I'll never give up. I want my pension.
Making sure their voices are heard is a key priority for this campaign. The next step, a march on Parliament on Budget Day.
Will you still bleed me, corrupt and greedy? Now I'm 60 and poor.
60 and poor. That's what those women are saying, Mark Spencer. And you probably recognise them because some of them are actually your constituents, and I know that you've met them. And actually they say that you've been very dismissive of their campaign. What do you say to that?
Well, I mean, I've met them a number of times, actually. I've met them certainly in the constituency. I've met them in London when they came to London. I think there's some good news in this, in that clearly society has changed and women's roles have changed since the 1950s. Of course, we're living a lot longer.
But they haven't got enough money for their retirement.
Well, so we do need to make sure that, if you go back to the 50s, people would retire at 65 as a man and probably would pass away in their early 70s. Well, now we're all living till we're sort of 80 plus, or lots of us are.
These women would say they've never really had equality, and now this is happening to them.
So the pension needs to adapt to those circumstances, and we've got to be fair to those women coming behind, to the 18-year-old girl who's coming out of university who's going to have to fund this system. So we've got to get the balance right. The government has listened actually and made £1 billion worth of concessions. So it only makes about a year's difference to these women, in the scheme of things.
You're saying it makes some sort of difference. OK, well, Margot Parker, the women fighting this change feel that they haven't really been given enough notice on this, as you heard in the film. Is that really fair, though, actually, because the law's been in place for nearly 20 years now, or more than 20 years, in fact.
Yes, it has, and I am quite sorry for them, because I think, to be honest, they'll have brought their children up, they'll have often had jobs where they perhaps work in local government, not terribly well paid their contribution, thought they were going to get their pension. And then this particular group, I think, also take care of people that are sick in their families. So I think you've got a balance there where they're doing a caring job as well.
But there has to be a cut-off, isn't there? Because what about people who were born in the 1960s?
Well, this is true, but there's got to be a fairness of how the people are paid today so that they can actually manage and survive. I think they've got to have the dignity of a reasonable pension that they can survive on, because if they said, well, I've only got this amount of money, and frankly, I can't pay my bills.
And this is an issue where dignity is really important, because this is very harsh for some of the 500,000 women across the country who it affects. They have paid into their pensions. They were expecting to see some of that in return. Some of them are having to go onto job seekers allowance, and they say that's degrading. They shouldn't have to be doing that, Mark.
I mean, so you have to phase this in, can't you? Wherever you draw the line, someone is going to lose out.
Should they be on job seekers allowance? I mean, wouldn't you rather they get the money that they've put in?
I think to be fair, I mean, my mother is 70 and she's still works. My mother-in-law is 71 and she's still working. So lots of women are fit and able to work and enjoy that, actually getting out of the house.
Why didn't the government then write to these women individually and say, this is what's going to happen, you need to prepare for this, we're letting you know about it? I mean, to be fair, Mark, we all got letters about Brexit, didn't we?
There was an enormous amount of coverage in the media and in the press, and lots of women were written to. Now, some of the WASPI women are saying they didn't receive
That's
those
exactly
letters.
What they're saying, yeah.
Now, of course, there's no way of knowing whether those letters arrived or not.
Maybe there wasn't enough notification. Maybe they should have come back and said again.
There was an enormous amount of coverage, though, in the press about the equalisation of pensions and men and women's pensions having to equalise and come at the same time. But we've got to be fair to everybody. So, for those women coming later...
How can we afford to compensate these women? How could we afford to compensate them?
Well, it's a question of balancing, looking after people that need help, and that's important. I mean, dare I go onto the foreign aid budget? Maybe I shouldn't, but there is money. But it's how it's allocated.
Not £30 billion, which is what it's going to cost.
Possibly not, but I agree.
Well, not everybody in their 50s are saying that they do help. Yeah. What about giving those that really are in more need than some others targeted help to help them? Would that be a way of doing that?
I think that's probably quite sensible. I think you've got to judge cases as they are. I mean, people that have to care for, very sick people, and they're not really being helped. I mean, a lot of people give up their life, give up perhaps going back into work because they've got sick relatives. I'd like to see a fair system there so that they're not penalised.
There is a carers allowance system, of course, for people that find themselves in those circumstances.
Surely, I mean, these people are having to compete as well with younger people for jobs. Women in their early 60s are going to try and find jobs. Well, younger people are going for as well. That's not fair either, is it? You want young people to get those jobs.
I think you do them discredit. I mean, I think women of that generation actually make very good employees.
I'm not saying
super reliable.
But I'm just saying what these women feel about being made to feel guilty in a way, Mark. That's what they're saying.
Well, I mean, I'd be disappointed if they felt guilty. I think that would be wrong if they were to feel like that.
The fact that they're having to compete with younger people.
No, I think that we need to recognise where we're at, and there is this enormous challenge in the budget and an enormous challenge to make sure we phase this in properly, and that's what the government's trying to achieve.
That march is on March the 8th in London. Now, it's been another week in which Brexit has dominated the political scene, with East Midlands politicians once again at the forefront of the debate. The Grantham MP Nick Bowles, who's being treated for cancer, left hospital to turn up to vote. Meanwhile, Broxtow's Anna Soubry couldn't hide her disgust at some of the debate, and Chris Leslie tabled dozens of amendments which were all ignored.
35 amendments that I've tabled today. I've not been able to even move or speak to any of those amendments. Doesn't it prove that the whole of the curtailing of this debate leaves Parliament unable to scrutinise the EU withdrawal?
So looking at that vote in the Commons then, Mark, you were a government whip, of course. Ken Clarke was the only Tory who decided to vote against you. Did the whips try to persuade him otherwise, or was it a pointless exercise?
I think Ken is Ken, and
we know that.
His commitments on Europe are well known, and frankly I admire him for that, for standing his ground and defending his well-known position that he's had for a number of years. Now, of course, as the government, we need to recognise that the people took a decision to take us out of Europe. The government has to deliver that, and that's what we're doing. And a number of colleagues, including Chris Leslie, frankly, were just trying to slow the process, delay it and block it. And I think that is a travesty, frankly, to democracy.
Are you happy now, Margot? This has passed through the Commons. We are definitely going to be leaving.
Yes, I mean, we're making a start, and the heavy ground digging work, I suppose, takes place between the Council of Ministers and our own Brexit Minister, David Davis, who I think, probably will do a very good job, hopefully. I'm very hopeful that he will.
What happens in the European Parliament now, though, Margot, with all this activity in the Commons? Do you just feel like you're on the sidelines as spectators, really, as a party?
No, not really. I mean, every day we go through all sorts of things. There are certain things that we still have to clearly vote on and have our say on, which we do. It's a different mood, actually. Immediately after Brexit, there was a very strong, very anti-UK mood within the Parliament. Even our country's name was dragged off the post box. I mean, it was put back 2 or 3 days.
Did it feel like this was
they've calmed down.
A piece of history, this vote, Mark?
It was massive. It really did feel like it was a significant moment in our history, and I think it was. We'll look back at this moment hopefully through rose-coloured spectacles and say what a fantastic moment it was in 20 years' time when we're trading with countries all over the world.
We'll see now. Passion's obviously running very high in the Commons, but away from Parliament, the BBC has been carrying out its own analysis of how the voting went in the referendum. It's looked at the results from individual polling stations and found one place here in the East Midlands where the voting exactly matched the national results. Our political editor Tony Roe has been taking a look at the findings.
The 527 people who cast their votes in this pub polling station represent exactly the split between Remain and Leave in the country. 51.99% voted that way when they walked into the pub to vote, so the picturesque villages of Mackworth and Kirk Langley, where Amber Valley meets Derby, are an exact barometer of how we feel as a country about leaving the European Union. Joe Wicks flies the Cross of St George from his home and voted Leave. Now he's not so sure.
I think if there was a big vote again, I do think a lot of people have changed their mind, because I think a lot of people like myself didn't realise how big it was, this Brexit thing, you know what I mean?
In Nottingham, the vote to leave was narrow, but not here. This is Bulwell. 69% voted to leave the EU. Bulwell Marketplace is, of course, where the former city trader and then UKIP leader chose to bring his bus during a referendum campaign.
Do you like the theme tune, The Great Escape?
We would be better off without the EU. We give too much money away and get no thanks for it. How about a thank you?
I think it would do the country good. So, get it back to English-grown produce. We could start trading in other countries and apart from the EU. So it'd be all good, I think, yeah.
Research into how we voted also shows that older people were more willing to vote to leave the EU. Those we spoke to here certainly fit the bill.
I think we should leave. You know, run his own country, we did years ago.
Ethnic minorities were less likely to vote to leave. There are concerns about people's attitudes to anyone perceived, rightly or wrongly, as an immigrant.
Well, I didn't vote for it because you're talking about immigrant as well. All over the world there's immigrant, no matter which way you look at it. Where is all the immigrant going to go?
Over on the other side of the city, we have the Radford and Park wards, where they voted heavily to remain, 68% in favour. The research concluded this part of Nottingham fits in with younger voters wanting to remain. Lots of students here.
Because I think it's more of a community to stay together. I feel like when people start breaking up, it's like that's when problems start happening.
Sold a couple of lies. Yeah. Sucks.
The report, which examined how over 1,000 wards voted, shows a strong link with educational qualifications and voting. The better educated voting to remain, the lower qualified wanting to leave. It could be about more than that, though. Poorer areas who feel left out, left behind, wanting to blame someone, accepting the simple argument to join the great escape from the EU to make things better for them.
Well, one thing that this BBC survey found, Margot Parker, was that we're still very divided.
I think we are, but, you know, it's happened, and everybody, I do believe, wants us to get on with this Brexit. Let's sort it, let's get it fixed. Let's go out and let's get good contracts around the world. Let's make sure businesses in the East Midlands thrive, and all over the country for that matter. There's a lot to be thankful for that we can do. As the world's 5th largest economy, we've got a lot to look forward to.
We did also hear that ethnic voters tended to vote Remain, and that they obviously still have a lot of concerns. What would you say to those ethnic voters?
I would say, frankly, this will be sorted. I mean, nobody is likely to be asked to leave the country. That's a nonsense. I think that's scaremongering of the very worst level.
There is that fear, though, isn't there?
Well, yes, but I think it's up to the government, actually, to calm that down and to say to people, look, of course, we will resolve this. There won't be a problem. Clearly, if you're here and you're working in the NHS, you'll be working in the NHS and most welcome to do so. So if you have the skills, we're very happy. I think it's the large unskilled swathes of population coming in that we simply can't afford to house, we can't afford to school, because all of the cascading down onto society makes it a tremendous burden. So it's fairness, but let's take care of people that are from Europe that work here. Of course we will.
Okay, well, with opinions so mixed, Mark, how do you actually go about representing your constituents when you've got such a mix of views and feelings about this?
So you have to do what's right, and what is right is getting the best deal for the United Kingdom.
You can't represent them all, though,
Well,
can
no,
you?
I think clearly you can't represent them in terms of remain or leave, but I think we need to recognise that remain and leave has gone now. We are leaving the European Union. That was the democratic will of the people, and so we need to get the best deal for the United Kingdom. We need to make sure relationships with our European colleagues improve and continue to trade with them, and look to the rest of the world and continue to build our economy so that the jobs and prosperity flows down to those people who are my constituents.
And you supported Remain whilst your constituents wanted to leave. So how do you square that circle?
Well, I mean, you have to take democracy on the chin, frankly, and leave one, and so we now have to commit to that and deliver what we can for the United Kingdom, and that comes down to the best deal we possibly can squeeze out of our European colleagues. They want to trade with us as well. It's a two-way street. Let's get out there in the rest of the world as well, and build the economy with everybody all over the globe.
Okay, well, that's the message here in the studio.